This lesson is called Conditional Statements. The objectives are is that we want to identify the hypothesis and conclusion in conditional statements. Then later we'll write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive for these conditional statements. So conditional statements are just statements that are written in an if-then format. The hypothesis is the phrase after the word if, it does not include if, and the conclusion follows the word then, but it does not include the word then. Most of these statements have an if and then. They don't necessarily have to, but they always have a hypothesis and a conclusion. So let's look at some examples. So in this first one, we want to state the hypothesis and the conclusion in the following conditional statement. If it is cold outside, then I will wear a coat. This has an if and a then, so after the word if is it is cold outside. So that is the hypothesis, if it is cold outside. Then I will wear a coat. So after the word then is I will wear a coat. So I will wear a coat is the conclusion in that statement. So if it is cold outside, then I will wear a coat. Hypothesis, it is cold outside. Conclusion, I will wear a coat. So see if you can do this one. If I am tardy, then I will serve detention. What is the hypothesis? Okay, the hypothesis is I am tardy. Then what is the conclusion? I will serve detention. As I said before, if-then statements may not always include the words if and then. So we're going to try and identify the hypothesis and conclusion in the following statements. The first one, I'll be rich when I win the lottery. Think about that. What part is the hypothesis and what part is the conclusion? Okay. The hypothesis here is I will win the lottery. What happens when I win the lottery? Well, then I will be rich. So sometimes you'll be asked to rewrite these actually with an if and then. So you could say, if I win the lottery, then I'll be rich. So that's a conditional statement from I'll be rich when I win the lottery. When you see the word when, that really stands for if. Okay, let's look at another one. All right triangles have one 90-degree angle. So think about it and see how you would write this one. I'll give you just a second. Okay, you might say, if a triangle is a right triangle, then it has one 90-degree angle. Okay? So those are if-then statements. All right, now we're going to look at something, we're going to add on to this. And you see the words converse, inverse, and contrapositive. Okay, right now we're going to write some statements. Don't worry about whether the statements are true or false. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. Today we just want to be able to write these statements in the correct forms. Okay, so the converse statement is going to switch the hypothesis and the conclusion of a conditional statement. So let's look at the first statement that we used. If it is cold outside, then I will wear a coat. We said that the hypothesis in this statement was it is cold outside. And then the conclusion was I will wear a coat. So the converse, you switch it around and you put I will wear a coat after the word if, and now that becomes the hypothesis, and you put the conclusion becomes the original hypothesis. Okay, so just switch them around. So if it is cold outside, then I will wear a coat becomes if I wear a coat, then it is cold outside. All right, next we have a statement that we call the inverse statement. The inverse statement negates the conditional. It negates both the hypothesis and the conclusion. When we negate something, we just use the word not. To negate I have a dog would be I do not have a dog. To negate it is raining would be it is not raining. Okay? So you just want to use the word not. So if we want to negate the original statement, which again, the original statement was if it is cold outside, then I will wear a coat, the inverse negates the conditional. So it just becomes if it is not cold outside, then I will not wear a coat. Okay? And then the next one is called the contrapositive. And again, the contrapositive just negates the converse, which was up here somewhere. Okay, so the converse is if I wear a coat, then it is cold outside. So to negate that is if I do not wear a coat, then it is not cold outside. All right, sounds maybe a little confusing, but this is logic that we're working on, and these are the rules. You're just going to follow them. Now let's look at something that might help here. And I see that my something didn't print right here, so let me just show you what that should say. Okay, this says, let me get a pen. These statements can be rewritten using letters to represent the hypothesis and conclusion. P represents the hypothesis, and Q represents the conclusion. This little symbol here is supposed to be an arrow. So this obviously didn't copy right, but it should say P and then an arrow to Q, which reads P implies Q. So the hypothesis implies the conclusion for the converse. And then the next one should say Q implies P. And then the inverse is not P implies not Q, and the contrapositive is not Q implies not P. Again, where you see the R, it should just be an arrow like that, and that reads implies. Okay? So let's try this. We're going to write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive to the following conditional statement. Pause the video for a minute and you write this. I'm going to pause mine. Okay, I hope you got this. Now, the conditional was this first statement. If the Falcons win on Sunday, then I will celebrate. The next statement is called the converse, and that is where we switch the hypothesis and conclusion. Now it says, if I celebrate, then the Falcons will win on Sunday. The next statement is called the inverse, and that is where we go back to the original order of the conditional, but we negate it. If the Falcons do not win on Sunday, then I do not celebrate. Notice we don't say if the Falcons lose. You just want to negate and say not. And then the last one is called the contrapositive, and the contrapositive is in the order of the converse, and it says, if I do not celebrate, then the Falcons do not win on Sunday. Okay, I want you to try and write a couple of your own. That's going to be your assignment. Is you're just going to write two conditional statements, two different ones, and then write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive for each. But let me again state those rules. So the conditional is P implies Q, and P is the hypothesis and Q is the conclusion. And then the converse says Q implies P. So in other words, the statements just flip the hypothesis and conclusion. Then the next one is the inverse, which negates P. So not P implies not Q. And then the last one is called the contrapositive. And that states not Q implies not P. So again, today we just want to try and write these, and then tomorrow we'll talk about truth values and we'll add a couple more things to this.